So, picture this. You're an alien diplomat, right? You've got this cushy job dealing with primitive species across a galaxy. Most of the time, it's pretty straightforward. You show up, they're grateful for contact with advanced civilization, and boom, easy integration into galactic society. Ambassador Kethvar had been doing this job for over 30 years. He was what you might call a specialist in primitive species management. His resume was impressive. 47 successful first contacts, with an average integration time of just 6 months per species. The guy was a legend in diplomatic circles. Other ambassadors would come to him for advice on how to handle tricky situations with newly discovered worlds. His secret? Kethvar understood that most primitive species follow predictable patterns. They developed on relatively safe worlds with moderate climates, reasonable gravity, and manageable weather systems. When they finally achieved basic space communication, they were usually desperate for help, guidance, and most importantly, rescue from whatever minor challenges their home planets presented. That's exactly what Kethvar thought when he got assigned to this backwater planet called Earth. The assignment came through standard channels, another routine primitive species contact. The preliminary report landed on his desk on a Tuesday morning, and honestly, it looked like the easiest job he'd had in years. The initial reports were pretty standard stuff. Third rock from their sun, lots of water, some basic life forms. The planet was in what galactic surveyors called the habitable zone, which meant it wasn't completely frozen or burning up. Surface scans showed typical land masses, oceans, and what appeared to be a breathable atmosphere, at least to the locals. Sure, the weather looked a bit intense compared to most civilized worlds. The reports mentioned something called hurricanes and tornadoes, which sounded unpleasant but not entirely unusual. Lots of primitive worlds had rough weather patterns. And okay, maybe the gravity was higher than most civilized worlds preferred, about twice what Kethvar was comfortable with, but nothing too crazy. He'd dealt with high-gravity worlds before. The really interesting part was the life forms. Earth seemed to have an unusual variety of species, more than most planets supported. The preliminary scans had identified thousands of different creatures, from tiny organisms to massive beasts roaming the continents. Most of them seemed harmless enough, though the reports did mention some rather large predators. Again, not uncommon for primitive worlds. What really caught Kethvar's attention was the dominant species, the humans. They'd recently achieved faster-than-light communication, which was always an exciting milestone for any civilization. It meant they were ready for galactic contact, ready to join the larger community of intelligent species. The humans had been practically begging for contact ever since they figured out how to send messages beyond their solar system. Their transmissions were flooding the galactic communication networks. Dozens of messages every day, all broadcasting on multiple frequencies. The content was exactly what Kethvar expected. Messages about peace, friendship, cultural exchange, trade opportunities. You know, the usual stuff you'd expect from a species that desperately needed rescuing from their hostile little rock. The humans seemed eager to learn about other civilizations, asking questions about galactic society, trade routes, and diplomatic protocols. They'd even sent mathematical proofs and artistic samples to prove their intelligence and peaceful intentions. Classic primitive species behavior. Try to prove they were worthy of contact with more advanced civilizations. Kethvar was already planning the standard evacuation protocols before he'd even finished reading the reports. The procedure was well established and had worked perfectly for decades. Step 1. Establish formal diplomatic contact. Step 2. Assess the species' technological and cultural development. Step 3. Explain the benefits of joining galactic civilization. Step 4. Offer relocation assistance to suitable colonial worlds. The beauty of the system was that most primitive species jumped at the chance. Who would want to leave behind a challenging home world for a nice, safe colonial planet where the weather was controlled, the gravity was comfortable, and dangerous predators had been eliminated centuries ago? It was a win-win situation. The primitives got better living conditions, and the galaxy gained new citizens who were grateful for the help. Kethvar had already identified several perfect colonial worlds for human settlement. There was New Harmony, with its gentle breezes and moderate temperatures year-round. Or perhaps Green Valley, where the gravity was 30% lighter than Earth's, and the most dangerous creature was a small herbivore that looked like a fluffy ball. The humans would love either option. He started drafting his initial contact protocols, planning the formal introduction ceremony, and preparing a standard Welcome to Galactic Civilization presentation. Easy assignment, right? Just another grateful primitive species ready to be rescued from their harsh home world and introduced to the wonders of advanced galactic society. What could possibly go wrong? Well, turns out everything could go wrong. The first sign that Kethvar's easy assignment was about to become a nightmare came exactly 3 weeks after he'd sent his formal invitation for diplomatic contact. He was sitting in his comfortable office aboard the neutral diplomatic station, sipping his morning stimulant drink and reviewing the final preparations for what he expected to be a routine primitive species welcome ceremony. That's where his communications officer burst through the door, looking like he'd seen a ghost. "Ambassador," the officer stammered, "we got incoming vessels on long-range sensors." Kethvar barely looked up from his reports. "Excellent. Right on schedule. Have our rescue shuttles prepared to collect the human delegation." "Sir," the officer continued, his voice getting higher, "I don't think you understand. These aren't distress signals. These are actual functioning starships." Kethvar's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. "What do you mean, functioning starships?" The officer activated the wall display, and there they were, 3 vessels approaching the station under their own power. Now, most species Kethvar made first contact with were still figuring out fire, or maybe basic metallurgy. The really advanced ones might have achieved basic space flight within their own solar system. But these guys had built interstellar vessels that had just completed a journey of over 20 light years. Crude ones, sure. The ships looked like they'd been assembled by someone who'd heard about starship design through a bad translation. They were bulky, inefficient, and covered in what appeared to be makeshift armor plating. But they worked. They traveled faster than light, navigated through hyperspace, and arrived exactly on schedule. That should have been Kethvar's first clue that maybe Earth wasn't quite the primitive backwater he'd expected. The second red flag came when the airlocks opened and the human delegation actually walked out. Kethvar had been prepared to provide environmental suits, breathing apparatus, maybe even medical support for a species that couldn't handle standard station atmosphere. Most primitive species needed significant assistance just to survive in artificial environments. The humans stepped out like they owned the place. No environmental suits, no breathing apparatus, no signs of distress whatsoever. They looked around the docking bay with the casual interest of tourists checking out a new hotel. The delegation was led by this woman who introduced herself as Captain Lisa Brooks, and let me tell you, she did not look like someone who needed rescuing. While most species Kethvar had worked with were delicate, refined creatures who'd evolved on gentle worlds with manageable challenges, Captain Brooks looked like she'd been carved out of stone. She was built like she could bench press a small vehicle with broad shoulders, powerful arms, and the kind of muscle definition that came from a lifetime of physical challenges. Her handshake nearly crushed Kethvar's fingers, and when she smiled, it was a confident grin of someone who'd never met a problem she couldn't solve with determination and brute force. But it was her eyes that really got to him. Captain Brooks had the kind of alert, predatory awareness that made every survival instinct in Kethvar's body start screaming. This wasn't the desperate gratitude he was used to seeing from primitive species. This was the casual confidence of an apex predator surveying new territory. The real wake-up call came during the formal dinner that evening. Diplomatic protocol required a ceremonial meal to welcome new species to the galactic community. Kethvar had carefully prepared a menu of the mildest, safest foods available, knowing that primitive species often had sensitive digestive systems. He watched in absolute horror as Captain Brooks and her team consumed their meals with obvious enjoyment. The humans were drinking something they called whiskey, a liquid that sensor analysis revealed contained lethal concentrations of ethyl alcohol, what should have been enough to poison most known species. The humans were treating like a mild recreational beverage. Then there were the foods. The humans had brought their own samples to share, and when Kethvar analyzed them discreetly, the results made his blood run cold. Concentrated capsaicin compounds that would cause severe chemical burns to most species. Fermented plant matter with bacterial cultures that should have been immediately fatal. Processed meats preserved with chemicals toxic to half the known galaxy. The humans ate all of it with obvious pleasure, chatting casually about their journey and asking polite questions about galactic society. Captain Brooks even complimented the station's food, though she mentioned it was a bit mild compared to what they were used to. During a quiet moment in the conversation, HFY decided to broach the subject that had been bothering him all evening. "Captain Brooks," he said carefully, "I've been reviewing the reports about your homeworld, and I must say, Earth seems rather challenging for a habitation. The extreme weather patterns, the high gravity, the aggressive wildlife. Surely your people would be interested in relocating to a more suitable environment." Captain Brooks paused in her consumption of what appeared to be liquid fire, looked HFY straight in the eye, and grinned. "Ambassador," she said with genuine warmth, "we wouldn't have it any other way." That's when HFY realized he might have seriously misjudged the situation. 3 weeks later, everything went sideways. Just when HFY thought he was starting to understand these strange humans, the galaxy decided to throw him the biggest curveball of his diplomatic career. The trouble started with a routine intelligence briefing that landed on his desk one ordinary Tuesday morning. The Scar hegemony was on the move again. Now, if you've never heard of the Scar, consider yourself lucky. These guys were basically the galaxy's biggest bullies, and they'd been throwing their weight around for the better part of 3 centuries. The Scar hegemony wasn't just any military force. We're talking about genetically engineered super soldiers who had literally never lost a battle. Not once. Not even a minor skirmish. Their military record was so perfect, it was actually used as a case study in galactic military academies, though mainly as an example of what happened when you gave unlimited resources to people who really enjoyed conquering things. See, the Scar had figured out something that most civilizations missed. Well, it wasn't really about superior technology or brilliant tactics. It was about psychology. If you could make your enemies believe they'd already lost before the fighting even started, you'd won without firing a shot. Their whole empire was built on a simple strategy that had worked flawlessly for centuries. Step 1. Show up with an overwhelming fleet that blocked out the local sun. Step 2. Demand immediate and unconditional surrender. Step 3. Watch entire star systems fall over themselves to comply rather than face the consequences of resistance. The beauty of the system was that it was self-reinforcing. Every successful conquest made the next one easier, because word spread about what happened to worlds that tried to fight back. The Scar didn't just defeat their enemies. They made examples of them. Entire civilizations would surrender the moment they saw Scar ships on their sensors, because everyone in the galaxy knew that resistance was not just futile, it was suicidal. The Scar military machine was a thing of terrifying efficiency. Their soldiers were bred from birth for combat, genetically modified to be stronger, faster, and more aggressive than any natural species. They felt no fear, showed no mercy, and followed orders with mechanical precision. Their ships were mobile fortresses, each one capable of reducing a planet's surface to molten slag in a matter of hours. But here's the thing that made them truly unstoppable. They were smart about picking their targets. The Scar didn't waste time on heavily defended systems or species that might actually put up a fight. They focused on expansion routes that gave them maximum territorial gain with minimum effort. They'd identify primitive or recently contacted worlds, overwhelm them with superior force, and move on to the next target. Which brings us to why they'd set their sights on the Sol system. From the Scar's perspective, Earth looked like the perfect target. A recently contacted primitive world, with no significant military infrastructure, no alliance treaties, and no experience with galactic warfare. The intelligence reports showed a species that had barely achieved interstellar travel, with crude ships and basic technology. It should have been the easiest conquest in Scar history. So when the Scar fleet reached the edge of the Sol system, Fleet Commander Zektar was feeling pretty confident. This was supposed to be a routine operation. Show up, demand surrender, process the paperwork, and move on to the next target. He'd done this same dance hundreds of times before, and it always ended the same way. The Scar transmitted their standard surrender now or be destroyed message on all frequencies, using the basic translation protocols that had worked perfectly for centuries. The message was simple clear, and had never failed to produce immediate compliance. They figured it would be just another routine conquest. Maybe the humans would put up token resistance for a few minutes. Some species like to make a symbolic gesture before inevitably giving up. But everyone knew how the story ended. The primitives would see the size of the Scar fleet, realize they were completely outmatched, and surrender before anyone got hurt. Instead, they got a response from Captain Brooks that roughly translated to "Bring it on." Fleet Commander Zektar stared at the transmission for a full minute, thinking there must have been some kind of translation error. No primitive species had ever responded to Scar demands with what amounted to a challenge. It simply didn't happen. It was like a mouse challenging a tiger to single combat. But when his communications officer confirmed the translation was correct, Zektar found the whole situation hilarious. These upstart primitives actually thought they could fight the mighty Scar hegemony. It was so absurd it was almost charming, like watching children play with toy weapons. That's when Zektar made what would go down in galactic history as one of the worst tactical decisions ever recorded. Instead of simply crushing the humans quickly and quietly, he decided to make an example of these upstart primitives. He even ordered his communications division to broadcast the upcoming battle across all galactic channels, figuring it would be good propaganda to show the entire galaxy what happened to worlds that defied the hegemony. The broadcast went live across thousands of star systems, with military analysts and civilian populations watching what everyone assumed would be a brief demonstration of Scar superiority. Betting pools open on how long the humans would last. Most estimates range from 15 to 30 minutes. Big mistake. Huge mistake. The battle that followed broke every rule of galactic warfare that anyone had ever written. When the shooting started, military observers across the galaxy settled in to watch what they assumed would be a textbook demonstration of superior firepower crushing primitive resistance. What they got instead was something that would haunt their nightmares for years to come. The numbers looked absolutely hopeless from the start. The humans had managed to scrape together maybe 30 ships for their defense fleet. These weren't sleek, purpose-built warships either. They were converted cargo haulers, mining vessels, and exploration craft that had been hastily fitted with whatever weapons the humans could bolt on. Against them, the Scar had deployed over 600 of their finest dreadnoughts, each one a floating fortress packed with enough firepower to level a continent. The humans were outnumbered 20 to 1. By all conventional military doctrine, it should have been a slaughter lasting maybe 30 minutes. Fleet Commander Zektar was so confident that he'd already started preparing his victory report before the first shots were fired. Instead, what followed turned into an 18-hour nightmare that had military analysts across the galaxy questioning everything they thought they knew about combat. See, the thing about humans is they don't fight like civilized species. Civilized species have spent thousands of years developing warfare into something resembling an art form. They follow established rules of engagement, honor codes that prevent unnecessary brutality, and tactical doctrines that minimize losses while maximizing strategic advantage. Most importantly, civilized species know when to retreat. They understand that some battles simply can't be won, and there's no shame in withdrawing to fight another day. Humans? Humans threw every single one of those concepts straight out the airlock. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came when a damaged human cruiser, its engines failing and hull breach in a dozen places, suddenly changed course and accelerated straight toward a Scar battle group. The Scar crews watched in confusion as the crippled vessel picked up speed, its remaining crew apparently making emergency repairs to the engines. Then they realized the humans weren't trying to escape. They were turning their dying ship into a guided missile. The converted cargo hauler slammed into the lead Scar dreadnought at nearly light speed, and the explosion lit up space like a small star. When the sensors cleared, both ships were gone, along with 2 nearby Scar destroyers that had been caught in the blast radius. That's when Fleet Commander Zektar realized he might have seriously underestimated his opponents. What followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic military history. Humans turned their damaged ships into kinetic weapons, aiming them at Scar vessels before abandoning ship at the last possible second. They sent pilots on deliberate collision runs that took out entire Scar dreadnoughts. They rigged their own vessels to explode, using them as massive bombs that could cripple enemy formations. But the real terror came when the humans started boarding enemy ships. Now, boarding actions were considered a last resort in civilized warfare, something you did only when absolutely necessary, and always with proper protective protocols and rules of engagement. The humans treated boarding like it was their preferred method of combat. They'd launch themselves across open space in nothing but basic survival suits, cutting through scar hull plating with improvised tools, and then fighting their way through enemy ships with ferocity that defied belief. These weren't trained soldiers. They were civilian volunteers, cargo pilots, mining engineers, and maintenance crews who decided that if they were going to die, they were taking as many scar with them as possible. The boarding actions were so brutal that veteran Scar Marines, warriors literally bred for combat who had never known fear in their genetically programmed lives, started abandoning their posts in terror. These were soldiers who'd conquered half the galaxy without blinking, and they were running from what they started calling the demons from the Deathworld. Captain Brooks herself seemed to be everywhere at once during the battle, her voice crackling over human communication channels as she coordinated desperate defense efforts. Her flagship, the converted mining vessel New Dawn, became the focal point of human resistance, somehow staying operational despite taking enough damage to destroy 3 normal ships. As the battle dragged on, something unprecedented happened. The Scar fleet, despite its overwhelming numerical superiority, started taking serious casualties, not just from the human weapons, but from the psychological impact of facing enemies who simply refused to acknowledge that they were beaten. The end came when Captain Brooks realized that the human defense was finally cracking. Too many ships had been lost, too many brave crews had made their final runs, and the Scar were regrouping for what would certainly be the killing blow. That's when she made a decision that would echo through galactic history. Captain Brooks turned the New Dawn toward the Scar command vessel and pushed her engines to maximum power. Fleet Commander Zektar watched in disbelief as a human flagship, trailing fire and debris, accelerated directly toward his massive dreadnought. The collision created an explosion visible from 3 star systems away. When the blinding flash faded, both ships were gone, replaced by an expanding cloud of superheated plasma and twisted metal. When the smoke cleared, the mighty Scar fleet, what was left of it, was retreating in complete disorder, broadcasting warnings about the demons from the Deathworld on every frequency they could access. The humans had lost battle, but they'd won something much more important. They'd proven that some species simply refused to be conquered. In the aftermath, as rescue ships pulled human survivors from the wreckage, the galaxy finally understood what they were dealing with. But the real shock wasn't just what the humans had done during the battle. It was how they acted afterward. Most species that survive a devastating military defeat tend to be broken, traumatized, grateful for any help they can get. The human survivors? They were already planning their next moves. Rescue crews reported finding injured humans who were still trying to coordinate defense strategies from their hospital beds. One survivor, a cargo pilot named Tom Mitchell, had apparently spent his recovery time sketching improvements to human ship designs on napkins. The stories coming out of the wreckage were unlike anything galactic rescue teams had ever encountered. They found humans who continued fighting with broken bones, who jury-rigged weapons from coffee makers and maintenance tools, who turned their own life support systems into improvised explosives. One particularly memorable report described finding a human engineer who'd been trapped in a damaged section of his ship for 6 hours and had used that time to reprogram the vessel's navigation computer to ram into enemy targets more effectively. But it was the interviews with Scar survivors that really opened everyone's eyes. These were genetically engineered super soldiers who'd conquered half the galaxy without breaking a sweat, and they were describing humans like they'd encountered literal demons. "They don't stop," one shell-shocked Scar Marine told investigators. "You hit them, they keep coming. You corner them, they turn into something worse. They use their own blood as lubricant to fix broken machinery. They bite when they run out of ammunition." The Marine had to be sedated after that interview. Fleet Commander Zektar himself, one of the few senior Scar officers to survive the encounter, filed a report that became legendary in military circles. "These creatures do not follow the established laws of warfare," he wrote. "They appear to view combat as a form of recreational activity. recommend immediate reclassification of human space as a quarantine zone. The ripple effect spread across the galaxy faster than the news itself. Within days of the battle, the Galactic Trade Consortium quietly updated Earth's classification from primitive world requiring assistance to approach with extreme caution. The bureaucrats tried to keep it low-key, but word got out when shipping companies started refusing to take contracts anywhere near the Sol system. Military academies across civilized space began frantically revising their tactical manuals to account for what they started calling human-style warfare. The Andromedian War College, the galaxy's most prestigious military institution, actually created an entirely new department dedicated to studying asymmetric combat psychology after their professors spent weeks trying to understand how the human battle tactics could possibly work in theory. The economic implications were staggering. Insurance companies immediately raised their premiums for any operations in human-adjacent space. The Galactic Shipping Guild created new hazard classifications. Tourist agencies canceled all promotional materials about charming primitive worlds and started warning travelers about the dangers of uncontrolled Deathworld species. But perhaps the most significant change was in how other species viewed Earth itself. Before the battle, Earth had been cataloged as just another marginally habitable world with some challenging environmental conditions. Afterward, xenobiologists and planetary scientists started looking at those challenging conditions in a whole new light. The crushing gravity that had seemed like a minor inconvenience, it had turned every human into a natural athlete by galactic standards. The violent weather patterns that looked unpleasant in the reports, they had taught humans to adapt to rapid environmental changes that would kill most species. The toxic atmosphere that required basic filtration, it had given humans respiratory systems that could function in almost any environment. Even the aggressive wildlife that had seemed like a primitive world's typical hazards took on new meaning. Researchers started realizing that humans had evolved alongside predators that would be classified as military-grade threats on most civilized worlds. No wonder they'd approach the scar without fear. They'd been dealing with Earth's version of apex predators their entire evolutionary history. Ambassador Kethvar spent weeks reviewing the battle footage in his quarters, tried to understand where his assessment had gone so wrong. The more he watched, the more he realized that every conversation with Captain Brooks had contained clues he completely missed. When he'd asked about Earth's challenging environment, she hadn't been putting on a brave face or making the best of a bad situation. She had genuinely meant it when she said they liked it that way. The high gravity, the extreme weather, the dangerous wildlife. Humans didn't just tolerate these conditions, they thrived on them. The galaxy's greatest military power had just been humbled by a species that treated planetary catastrophes as weekend entertainment. Finally, it all clicked into place. Earth hadn't been a prison holding humanity back from reaching their potential. It had been a training ground, preparing them for challenges that would destroy most civilizations. Every natural disaster, every predatory encounter, every environmental extreme had been like a military exercise, forging humans into something the galaxy had never seen before. And now that the Deathworlders had finally left their world behind, nothing would ever be the same again. The balance of power that had kept the galaxy stable for centuries was about to shift, and nobody was quite sure what came next.